Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Motogp Extra podcast. I'm Reese, and joining me as always to discuss the events of the weekend is my co-host Dill. Now, on the last episode, we actually left a poll asking you guys who you think will be crowned world champion, obviously between Martin and Bagnaia in the Motogp class. And the results are in for that. Whether they'll change after this, I don't know, but as of recording this, after the Sepang GP, currently, you guys seem to think Martin is going to win the championship with 57.9% of the vote, and of course, Bagnaia 42.1%. So I'll hand it over to you, Dill. Were you surprised by the outcome of that? Because I'm actually a little bit surprised to see that it's such a big margin, almost 10% in Martin's favour. I thought it would be a lot more split in the middle.
Well, I was actually, because I like to keep an eye on the kind of interactions and all that, so I was actually looking at it earlier in the week, and it was actually like at one point like 75-25% in Martin's favour. Over the last couple of days, it really came back in Pecco's favour, so it was actually at one point like heavily a landslide in Jorge Martin's favour, which was not too unsurprising really, because since Misano, Pecco has not been as quick as him. But he just seems to get enough out of a weekend that it isn't a disaster, and I think he keeps doing that. And I think people are going to heart thinking somehow Martin is going to use his pace to win it, but we saw this weekend it doesn't always work that way. So I still think people thought that maybe Pecco being a champion already as maybe just a bit more in caliber in terms of running out a championship and all that, right? Rossi experience and the whole academy and all that. So I'd say that's probably what brought Pecco back in our poll.
Yeah, you're probably right with that one. I mean, I said I was surprised, but actually, you're probably right. I mean, I think both of our opinions was coming out of that podcast that Martin was probably in the driving seat, and I think Definitely. That perhaps is the general opinion. So I suppose it's not too big of a surprise to see Martin winning out, but I did think it would be perhaps a little bit closer between the two, because I know it kind of depends which side of the fence you sit on. But like I said, it probably could change after this, but that's the official results that we're calling them as we've seen them here. But that's, of course, MotoGP and the last episode. We'll move on to this episode, obviously the Malaysian Grand Prix this time, and we had I don't think it was really the best weekend in terms of the racing action that we actually got, but there was one race that was quite interesting, as it always is, Moto3, so we'll head straight into that one. And of course, it started off with a bit of a pack race, as you'd expect with Malaysia, the long straights, even some of the high-speed corners, you sort of full throttle, so it allows a lot of slipstreaming. We saw a lot of dawdling and qualifying in all the classes, actually, so it does show you how important the slipstream and a bit of a marker is here. But it soon changed. Not everything stayed as a big pack, so pass it over to you, dear. What did you make of the start of the Moto3 race?
It was your typical start at a track that has long straights, because like the run down to turn one on a Moto3 bike, they're nearly maxing out by the time they get to it. They're absolutely flat when they get to turn one. It's like it's coming into turn one and lap one is like coming into turn one and lap two. There's no difference. It's that fast. Like they're getting to the same speeds. It's such a long run down. So the start was crucial. Of course, into turn one on a Moto3 bike with a load of teenagers, it's always going to be a bit hairy. So I wasn't surprised to see such a big group at the start, and I wasn't surprised to see it get thinned out later in the race. But I think, like you said, a track that's such high speed and a lot of it is wide open throttle, it does bring the groups in together and brings it closer. And again, the fact that you have people fighting for championships, you have people getting to this point of the year thinking, I don't know where I'm going to be riding next year. You have people who are down in that part of the world they're from, so they're always maybe given extra 10%. So you get these race weekends at tracks like this where championship riders are a little bit tense, some riders are a little over enthusiastic because they can sense the result, and then some riders have no choice but to send it because their futures are up for grabs. So to see the big group was definitely not a surprise, but as we'll cover in a second, it didn't stay too big for too long.
Yeah, it was big for a beginning, and actually someone that it was good for that it was big, obviously, it was David Alonso, but unfortunately for him, he got his way through the pack. Obviously, having that big pack does help with that, because you can sort of just pick off one at a time, although he had a very good first lap. But unfortunately, all went wrong for him. I'm not sure actually which lap it was on, but it was fairly early on into the race. So he had a high side, put up quite a few different riders, Moreira, Holgado. Foressato actually had his own accident, I believe, behind. I think he also high-sided in a separate accident. It was one of those things where we were quite lucky, really, that no one was injured in that one, because Alonso actually went back into the track, but he sort of felt so lucky that everyone had sort of already dived to the left to sort of avoid the crash, so they were already off the track, and then pretty much just all piled into his bike instead. So, fortunately, no big injuries. That could have been a pretty scary one, but it has pretty much ended the championships, of course, of Holgado and Alonso. A bit of an outside shot. They were 25 points off. I think they were actually joint, weren't they, in terms of the points? But that's pretty much it over now. Mathematically, they're still within a shout because Masia didn't win this race. But if Masia had have won, they would be out completely. But it completely changed the face of the race. It's changed the championship, changed the race. We were lucky to get away with no injury because then that allowed, obviously, just the top few guys to be miles ahead of the rest of the pack.
Yeah, it was a horrible crash. Even just the Alonso crash in zone, it was a proper over the bars high side, and I was at a part of the track where turn 4 you come out and you go up over a crest. The TV camera really does not do it justice how much of a up and down you have there. So you're always, when you're going up a bit of a kind of an incline like that, you're always going to have a bit of a movement at the rear, and a Moto 3 bike, especially when you're coming from, I think he qualified like P26 or something. He was way back, so
really
he was
back.
Proper back in the rafters from the qualifying. So he was he was up. He made 7 positions on the opening lap. He was making progress, and he obviously just felt good. And in fairness, you do see it a lot of times. I go back to Pedro Acosta in Qatar when he went from pit lane. When you kind of have that momentum, you keep just putting passes on people. You probably feel invincible, and probably was just a bit of a slight overstep over the mark. And I do believe 16 minutes after the sprint race on Saturday, it absolutely lashed down. So maybe a curb weeped, a bit of excess water, maybe just a slight damp spot. So something small like that, considering the fact we had a separate incident again for Asata pretty soon after. Maybe the track wasn't perfect in that part of the track, so maybe that was part of the issue, but it probably was just an over enthusiastic Alonso really. But like I said, we're very lucky that we didn't have any serious injuries, because the racing line is to kind of come out of that corner, go back across the track, and that's kind of where he and his bike went. A lot of riders jerked left and managed to kind of get on the curb on the grass, but unfortunately a lot of them got caught up in it, and it was pretty messy, and bikes and everything. It was lucky, to be honest, we didn't get a red flag, because when I saw first live, there was just, you could just see a lot of debris, and it kind of, instead of all going into the gravel, it came back across the track, so it felt like the debris kind of spread into the racing line a bit. So I was kind of thinking we're going to be hard pressed here to get this cleaned before the leaders get around again. But I think we did one lap under double waved yellows, and then it was pretty cleaned up. So thankfully we did get away with one today again. I think, to be honest, I think I've said that in the last 3 podcasts, that we've had collisions and crashes like this lately in the championship where we've definitely gotten away, and I think this is another one today.
Yeah, it seems to be one of those things that, especially in this modern era with everything so close, it's just more regular. We've seen it go wrong quite a lot in recent years as well. Like we hadn't had any major incidents really for a long time, but then in the past sort of decade we've had quite a few, and we get these near misses fairly regularly. So you can see how, of course, these incidents do end up happening. Riccardo Rossi also was involved in that incident. I think he was probably a bit winded. I think that's probably why the yellow flags were out for sort of one lap. But they actually did a really good job to get it cleaned up, because I think most of the riders sort of tried to get back on, so they'd already picked their own bikes up, and the few that couldn't, I guess they just sort of pulled those bikes away. And Riccardo Rossi got up after a little bit. I think he was sort of on his hands and knees, sort of crawled away. I think he must have been a bit winded or something. But fortunately, everybody okay. But sort of back to the cause of the crash, maybe could be to do with tyre temperature or tyre wear, because Moto3, tyre wear is something we never talk about, even tyre temperature to an extent, but Malaysia, just the way it is, it's so hot, it actually was making the Moto3 tyres wear out for once. So potentially, if he was pushing to come through the pack, maybe he could have worn his tyre or overheated his tyre a little bit, and that's just enough to send him on the high side. Obviously, we don't know exactly what happened. I suppose we probably won't find out. I suppose it was just rider error at the end of the day, so it's just one of those things. But, these things definitely do play into it. And because of the tyre wear, it was a bit of a high-speed chess match, is what we actually got down in the notes, which is always a good way to put it. A bit tactical, because we had some of those more experienced guys at the front, obviously, before we had the second incident. Of course, we had Masia, who's been in Moto3 for a long time, on Chu, Sasaki, so a few quite experienced guys at the front, along with some youngsters as well. But of course, they were probably following the lead of the more experienced riders, perhaps just sitting back and, not overstressing the tyre, probably allowing maybe some of those guys that didn't quite have the pace to keep on the back as well. But it was quite tactical, wasn't it, throughout the race?
Yeah, for the most part, after we had that crash, and I think the group then slowly started to split, and we had a front group, as we usually do, a kind of the standard racetracks that aren't as quirky as some other ones. You get these groups where slipstream is a massive part. Nobody can kind of make a break. And again, you touched on the tyre wear. I think I saw an interview with Joel Kelso. He said 4 laps is all the tyres have before there's a serious drop off, which is unheard of in Moto3. That's MotoGP qualifying tyre sort of droppage. So it was really interesting to hear that. So for whatever reason, whether it be track temperature, just whatever the rubber compound, or ambient temperature, it was a real scorcher in terms of tyres. So it definitely played a part in it, because it was a race that we saw a lot of mistakes even at the front. We saw Rueda and DM making a big mistake at the end, put Bartelli on the kind of grass and took out Anshu. So there was mistakes up and down the field. So again, maybe just the drop off in tyre maybe was a bit too much for some people. Again, if you go all season thinking I can pretty much push this tyre to the last lap, like it's not a uncommon feat to see fastest laps being set in the last kind of third of a race. Like, so the tyres usually from Dunlop kind of do, in fairness, go the distance. So I think that definitely played a part in it, and I think the more experienced riders probably have been there a few more times where they've gone, right, we can kind of understand this is how the race is going to play out. It's going to slow down and we're going to have a bit more of a tactical battle. But in fairness, when we got to the end, we did get a lot of battling, and it kind of went back to a bit more of a standard elbows out 1 or 2 race. And in fairness, the last few laps were good fun.
Yeah, I think once they got past a certain point, the tyres are gone. You've just got to go with what you've got left. And obviously, basically, once it was that sort of top 3, obviously after Rueda's unfortunate mistake, it was 2 championship contenders and one of those championship contenders' teammates. So it definitely got a little bit interesting. And the championship did tighten up a little bit because Sasaki obviously ended up beating Masia and reducing the gap very slightly. So it makes things close up a little bit more going into those last few rounds. But of course, things have changed quite drastically with the incident that happened earlier on in the race. So the championship is looking like it's just Sasaki versus Masia now at this point. I think I think you probably agree with me when I say that, but I think that's what we're going to be looking to. These last 2 rounds now is just between those 2 guys, and they're just going to be focused entirely on each other. You know, just winning the race is completely out of the question now. It's just beat the other guy. A bit like what we've got in MotoGP, really.
Yeah, David Alonso and Holgado are 41 points each respectively off Masia, so without a massive swing, even like for example, neither of them can both still, like after the next round, one of them will be definitely out of it, because no matter what happens, there's not enough points for them both to gain enough points back. So realistically, one of them might take it to Valencia, but it's going to really come down to Masia or Sasaki. I kind of agree that I probably don't think either of them will win a race in Qatar or Valencia. I think that it'll be which one of them can make the best of this next double header, and that will settle the title. Now, Masia has a nice bank of 13 points. Like 13 points isn't enough to be comfortable, but it's a wild card where if he has a mechanical, he can still go into Valencia almost level with Sasaki, and if something was to happen, like, it's so easy to get taken out in Moto3. If something happens at Qatar, you go offline in the dust and stuff, anything could happen. So he has that margin, whereas if anything happens to Sasaki, it's done really, because of that 13 points. He has to, realistically, Sasaki has to be on the podium probably the last 2 rounds and hope that he can make up kind of 8 points each round and win it by a couple of points really. So I still think it's heavily in Messia's favour. I think I wouldn't be surprised if he wrapped it up in Qatar. I think he could definitely, if he beats him in Qatar, it's a very hard hill to climb for Sasaki when we go to Valencia, because Valencia is known for being one of those tracks where it's so easy to make a mistake. It's cold. We get always a bit of a questionable forecast. So Valencia is one of those horrible races where you never want to go to when you're kind of chasing a championship. And to be fair, you never want to go there leading the championship. You always kind of want to get the job done before you get to Valencia, and you can actually relax and try and go out and show your stuff for the last race. So going into Valencia with a championship on the line, we've seen it for years. We saw it in 2006, we saw it in 2015, we saw it in 2017. Anything can happen. It's pretty crazy. So it's going to be interesting Qatar, because I think they'll probably risk a bit more in Qatar, knowing that they need to give themselves as little work for each other to do going into Valencia, because Valencia will be a real tough one to do with the weather and just everything goes on with it and the track layout really.
Yeah, I mean, if Masia does beat Sasaki, like you say, in the next race, it's pretty much done. He'd pretty much probably only need like a top 10 at Valencia really to bring on the championship, which is not a given in Moto3, I guess, because of the big packs. You could easily get punted off, and last lap you start first and you end up like 15 something, but generally, based on the form, or I'm pretty sure the top guys can get into the top 10 without too much difficulty, so they can ride at 90%, sort of make it there. So yeah, I think it will be quite crucial. Of course, I don't think Messier will win it outright in Qatar. It will take obviously something to happen to Sasaki really for that to happen. I think a bit like kind of last week with Acosta and Arbolino. Like he was never really going to win it unless something bad happened to Arbolino. But I do feel like he can take a step and pretty much guarantee himself the championship. I do think though. I think you said that neither of Holgado or Alonso can actually, like, they can't both be in contention still. I think they can if they're 41 points behind, because they don't need to be within 25. But if they finish first and second, and Messier didn't finish, then they'd both be within 25.
Yeah, technically, but the chances of that happening are
yeah. I don't think either of them are really in the shot, but mathematically, they both can still go in for last round as it is. So yeah, it is still possible for them to do that. But obviously, again, that would require a DNF for Messier and 1-2 for them, which both those things happening is rather unlikely. But back to this race itself, rather than the championship, we had a new winner. We were talking earlier on about the experience and looking after tyres, but it was the rookie who ended up coming out on top and actually taking his teammate by surprise. Probably something we'll talk about a little bit with I think Sasaki was a little bit shocked to see Colin Bay actually come past him. But the first Dutch winner since 1990, apparently. So that is unbelievable. Like, it's such a long time. You kind of think, like, you think back like Dutch riders, you think like Van der Gulberg and stuff. Obviously, the senior of the two, not currently Zonta racing in Moto2. Like, you think back like to riders that you remember, but I guess Jürgen must have never won a Grand Prix at all, and all the way back to 1990, which is absolutely incredible. But he's been showing the form. Vea's been showing the pace all season. He's had a couple of pole positions. He had the podium last time out. He should have had the podium in India until Sasaki took him out, which, may kind of play into a little bit of what actually happened today. Potentially, you might think, you know what, you kind of screwed me before. But yeah, it was a great race from Vea. He's been showing the pace throughout the season. Obviously, looked good in Red Bull Rookies and stuff like that before. And I think for next season, he's certainly going to be one of those riders in contention for the championship.
His start of the season wasn't special by any means compared to what we're kind of used to now with your Alonso's, Acostas, and the like. So he did take a few rounds to kind of get an idea, but I think wasn't he his first kind of race at the front was Saxony, if I remember correctly. He was thereabouts. I think he
was on pole in that race.
Was he on pole? I knew he was quick there.
On the front row, definitely.
I know he didn't get it to the end because the two boys, his teammate and Anshu battled to the last corner, and Anshu won it. But he was definitely quick there, and that's when we probably first kind of sat up and took notice of him, because to be honest, there's so many fast young riders coming through into the class. You can't keep on track of all of them. It's really hard. So when he did actually start performing and consistently being in the front group, then you start to notice that he obviously has something special. He has a bit of the bench side, kind of slightly oversized for the bike, so I'd imagine he's not going to be spending too many seasons in Moto3. So I'd imagine maybe, obviously he's won a race this year, so he's already done probably better than, I think Boney ever won the one race, or did he ever even win in Moto3?
I don't know if he ever did win.
He definitely struggled. He definitely was. I feel he had this kind of Anshu syndrome where like he should have won many times, but like just the last laps never went his way because of his size. But I just feel like that again. What he'll do is probably be very competitive next year consistently, and then they might try and get him up onto Moto2 bike maybe in replace of Tulovic, or get him up into Moto2 and just get him his career kind of on the right path. Because I think it's very difficult when you're in Moto3 to make the difference when you're a bigger rider. Like, look at the Messier by no means is big, and Sasaki could fit in your back pocket. So like they're perfect examples of what it needs to be to fight for a Moto3 title. So he's done very well this season, in fairness, and again, I think he has deserved this victory because he was down to his penultimate corner in India. He's been there many occasions, and wasn't he quite quick in Indonesia as well, if I remember correctly? He was thereabouts again. So
yeah, I think he was.
He's been consistently. It's not like we've seen kind of Furussata kind of pop up in these flyaway races a couple of times, but kind of in the European calendar has kind of not really done much. And same with kind of Aji, he showed a few flashes while we've been down here in Indonesia and Malaysia and stuff like that. So he's kind of been consistent where other riders who've shown promise throughout the season haven't been able to do it. So when he kind of figured it out, he's kind of been able to show week in, week out that he's able to do it. And again, he is in a good team. So he definitely will probably be the number one rider on that team next year, and he'll definitely have a good go at the championship. Again, being tall, I don't know if he'll be able to do it for a full season, because I just feel like he will. It's such a disadvantage that it probably won't work out for him, but I still think he'll show enough that will get him into Moto2, and then he can kind of kick on from there. But again, today he was very good, and I think today in his head, in his hindrance usually is his weight, and I think that really helped him today in the braking, and it kind of made up probably a bit of an advantage. So it's a clever rider who can turn his disadvantage to a positive when the opportunity presents itself. So in fairness to him today, he did a stellar job. So well deserved winner.
Yeah, he rode fantastically. Like you say, throughout the season, he's kind of been there or thereabouts in quite a few rounds. So it's been coming, and it's always nice to see when a rookie gets their first win, because that's 2 rookies, isn't it, this season that have managed to win races. So it does show really the caliber of these lower championships, how they can come straight into World Championship Grand Prix racing, and they can pick up victories in their first season, because that was something that maybe even 5 years ago would have been really, really like outstanding. But it happened. I mean, it still is outstanding, but you know what I mean, it happens quite regularly now, whereas it's something that never used to happen. If you got a podium in your first season, you'd be applauded having a really good rookie season. So it does just show these championships. And something I did actually want to talk about, we haven't got it in the notes, but sort of in Part Ferme, it seemed like maybe Sasaki was expecting him to sort of ride shotgun to him and not pass him. Sounded like maybe there'd been sort of an agreement that that's what would take place, but it didn't, of course. And I can't blame Veja for going for the victory, especially if it's your first victory. So I've got no problem with it. But Sasaki did seem quite surprised, didn't he? And perhaps even some of the team members didn't seem super thrilled that their potential world champion kind of was second to his teammate today.
Yeah, there was a drastic shot. I think we've talked again, when you get to the end of the season, you can see the highs and lows of the team right through the race, and I think we cut to the Husqvarna team as they crossed the lane, and there was like 4 mechanics absolutely elated, and then there was just like team bosses down crossing, thinking like, this is not good, like this is not what we needed. Just to go back a couple of points there, Bo Benchner obviously didn't win because he's Dutch. We haven't had a winner since 1990, so I just was looking at the notes there thinking, it just clicked to me, so he clearly never won one, so that obviously was an oversight there. But you can't blame Veja, really. Like the opportunity doesn't come around, and he's probably still has a bit of a chip in the shoulder from India, like, because like I didn't see any apology from Sasaki or any kind of remorse. He kind of felt like that, I'm in a championship battle, it was kind of, I have to try and stuff like that. But when you're a rookie and stuff like that, like the first one is always the hardest, no matter whether it be a podium, race win, pole position. Once you get one, they start to come more easily. Just the pressure is not completely, but the pressure just of getting across the line. We saw with Zarco what it's done for him. Like it was such a long time coming, and it built, and it just started becoming a bit of the elephant in the room with him. So I don't think
he's not been stellar though, has he?
No, I don't mean he's improved, but just the fact that we had, like, how many times did he get into lead and crash out, or how many times did he have racing and pace and it just never went his way?
Onchu, I guess, as well.
Onchu, yeah, exactly. So
it took so long to win a race. He's won like 3 this year.
Yeah, he's a better example of what I can do, but I think Zarco's already kind of planning his on the season. I think it was just it was more the fact of the way the pressure and the mental thing builds upon you. If you don't win it, you can't achieve. And again, it's another one. He's crashed out of P9 or something today again, like battling someone into turn 1, then going for a really weird line into turn 2 and just tucking the front on the dirty part of the track. So slightly
serving a long penalty.
Exactly. So it was when the pressure of trying to achieve something builds, you slowly start to make silly mistakes and just kind of get flustered. Perfect example is Zarco up until he won in Phillip Island, as well as Canet. But again, kind of bringing it back to Veja, you can't think, he's in the championship battle, I should really help him. You need to be. It's not like it was last race of the season where, like, if I win, I take the championship off my team. It wasn't that point yet. If it was then we'd kind of be like, well, maybe, but we still have 2 races to go after that, so there was 3 at the time of the race, and it's not like he's put him out of the championship. He's still taking points off Messiah. So I have no problem with Veja, but again, the team probably looking at our rookie beating our championship contender in his own team is probably not great for the team, but at the same time, as much as it's a team sport, it's also an individual sport.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's got his own sponsors and stuff that are paying lots of money to support his career, so to win for them. And also, there's the element of do you not want to give up a win? You never know. You never may be in that position again. I mean, obviously, with the pace he's shown, of course, he's going to win more races, but you never know how these things are going to pan out. So, yeah, I think I don't have any problem with him not giving it up. I mean, I suppose if there was an agreement, perhaps maybe you can argue a little bit like, oh, perhaps he should have let him through. But yeah, it's racing, isn't it? And at the end of the day, the riders want to win, and that's what we want to see. It would have been bad if it had been orchestrated, if he'd like put his hand up on the run to the line and sort of let him through. It would have been a bit of a rubbish way for the race to end. So yeah, glad that it was an organic finish. But of course, lots of drama with the title fight then, with of course Sasaki not managing to win the race. But Moto2, no drama with the title fight. That's completely over. So we'll move on to Moto2 now. And the start of the race was a little bit eventful. Obviously, we have Manu Gonzalez qualifying pretty well. Fermin Aldeguer continuing his run of form, both getting good starts off the line. But then a bit of an incident sort of between turn 1 and turn 2. Very strange one, really. Aldeguer sort of on the inside and Gonzalez on the outside. Gonzalez cuts back a little bit. But then it's not actually the cutback where the contact happens, what you'd usually expect. It's sort of the run down then towards sort of turn 2 as you about to change direction there. They sort of just met in the middle and down went Gonzalez. Obviously that was his race completely over. Didn't seem to be under investigation or anything, but just love to see what you make of that incident, because it was so strange. I think probably a little bit more blame on Aldeguer, but sort of nothing kind of got mentioned about it by the stewards.
I think definitely was more on Aldeguer, 100%. But I think it's just two riders trying to get on the same piece of track in turn 2 of lap 1. I think it's just a 60% racing incident kind of thing. It doesn't look amazing in Aldeguer's term, because he's not level with him. Alonso's slightly ahead of, or Gonzalez is slightly ahead of him, so when they do touch, it does look like he's kind of bounced into him. But if you kind of watch it further back, they're both kind of being channeled into the same piece of track, and the contact is kind of inevitable in a way for me. The fact that they didn't investigate, or like we didn't from the live feed, there was no sense of investigation or reviewed after the race or anything. The whole time that Ramin was leading, you were kind of thinking, is there a 3-second penalty coming? Because he builds out the gap to Acosta, like when in 5 laps he is over 3 seconds, so he has the penalty there. And if he does get a long lap here, it's a very long lap indeed, because it's in the penultimate corner. It's one of the longest, if not the longest, of the calendar. It goes on for quite a while, so it's definitely a long lap penalty this time. Whereas I think at Jerez, it's in Lorenzo corner. It's kind of just like a wide corner. It doesn't really lose you that much time.
Well, Saxon Ring, where it's just the outside of the track.
Yeah, exactly. So it's definitely a big penalty if you was to get it. Now, in the end, we didn't, and then we were kind of speculating afterwards, is he going to get a penalty after the race? Because he does slow down quite a bit in the last lap, and it does end up about 3.4 across the line, I imagine. I think it was around that, so he still technically would have been okay, but the fact that there was no communication from the race stewards, we didn't know what was going on, so the whole race you're kind of thinking, he's leading now, like, but is he going to have a long lap? Is he going to get a penalty after the race? Is he completely out of bother? So we didn't know what was going on. I kind of put it down to a racing incident. Like, turn 1 is a hairpin, turn 2 is a downhill, kind of slightly negative camber or positive camber hairpin. It's just a bit of a weird corner, and you're funneling 25, 30 Moto2 bikes in there. Full fuel, not perfectly up to temperature in terms of tires. It's always a bit lumpy in there, so it was an unfortunate incident. I can feel the frustration, but yeah, I'd put it down more racing incident over penalty.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. I think it definitely was a racing incident. I just sort of posed the question as in, the stewards didn't even mention it. It would have been good to see an acknowledgement, say no further action or whatever, because it's a first corner thing. I think I probably, like every single year we've raced here, there's been probably a crash at that corner in one of the 3 races on the first lap. It's just how it is. It just tightens up so much, and when you try and force these, especially with the bigger bikes, because they take up more room and they're a bit harder to be so nimble with, there's always going to be a little bit of contact. And to be honest, I think Gonzalez was quite unfortunate to actually crash from the contact, because it wasn't particularly heavy. Just obviously how the bike sort of fell, and it just took the bar out of his hand or whatever. But Yeah, I was glad to see that there was no penalty for it, but it's just one of those things where it would have been at least nice, like the steward had sort of just mentioned it so that we knew for a fact there wasn't going to be anything. But yeah, these things do just happen in sort of first lap incidents in racing. But moving on to sort of our next topic then, crashes. It seems to be a bit of a common occurrence now in Moto2, and I think we probably made mention of it being a common occurrence sort of last week, that it seems like there's just lots of crashes, especially in these flyaways where it's hot, greasy conditions. The bikes are so similar, the tyres are obviously all the same, pretty much a spec series with most people being on Calexes. Only small differences between people, 2/10 a lap, and that's how these big gaps form and why the races particularly aren't that interesting in Moto2, but it also brings on these crashes because people try and make that little bit difference, to make to make a gap on someone, or they make a small mistake and it's like, oh, it's going to take like 10 laps to catch that back up. So they try and push a little bit more, and just with it being probably the height of the day, usually it's probably the hottest point of the day is sort of midday roughly. So that's what obviously when the Moto2 race is. We all seem to have lots of crashes, especially in the last few rounds in Moto2, just throughout the race, just lots of little front enders or lots of different crashes, and it was the exact same today.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much that it is pretty much a spec series, and tires are the same. Engine is a sealed unit that's randomly allocated to each team, so you can't really gain much of the advantage if you're not at 100%. You're going backwards, and even if you're feeling amazing, you never see someone come really, really through the pack. If the standard dry race, it's very hard to do in Moto2. So again, I think that a lot of I'll go back to the point I made in Moto3 where there's definitely riders in this Moto2 field that don't know where they're going to be riding next year, and they're going to try and make a bold start or a bold decision to go for it into turn 2 or go for it into turn 4, and trying to force the envelope a bit early to kind of make a break and get something flowing for them. So I think that probably comes down to why riders stepping over the limit. Moto2 I always feel is probably the messiest one in terms of crashes. We had a lot of crashes in turn 9. There was Vietti,
also crashes
Garcia
at the same time as well.
Yeah, we had multiple
rider crash
under the
and then
flag.
someone follow them in.
Yeah, which is quite dangerous. But I in a racing situation, I feel it's not as bad, because I feel if you do an FP3 crash under yellow flag, it's very, very much a no-no. Whereas in the race, if you're 6-7 laps into a race in Malaysia, there's a lot going on. You're focusing on so much. So if someone crashes 3-4 seconds ahead of you, it's very hard to kind of you're still at full speed by the time you get there, so it's not as a big of an issue, but it's still never nice to see another rider. And we had it twice in the Moto2 race. We had it with Vietti and Nozani and Garcia and Guevara, I believe, were the four riders in 2 incidents. So turn 9 is just downhill into a hairpin. It just goes flat as you get to the middle part, and then real steep kind of exit to it. So it's a bit of a weird corner. We saw a late crash in GP. It's a kind of a black spot every year for crash. It's one of the corners that really catches the riders. It's
Agora last year.
Thank you. So yeah, it's one of those things. So again, when we saw a lot of crashes there, again, I wasn't surprised. We saw lots of riders from front runners to backmarkers, or not really backmarkers, but the lower end of the top 20, I suppose.
Because they did get lapped, to be fair. So
yeah, exactly. So it's always an issue when you go to the hot countries, because the temperature comes up, everything gets a bit greasy. It's not usual temperatures. You're probably being boiled alive, so the mistakes are probably less punishable in a way. You're making small mistakes and big penalties, so it's kind of more expected here. But again, it's just kind of a running theme we've probably both noticed over the last 4 flyaways or whatever it's been.
Yeah, it happens sort of throughout the season to an extent, but it's definitely worse in these flyaways. Yeah. And you perhaps get it in summer in Europe as well quite regularly, because similar conditions in terms of the greasiness. So yeah, it happens also in the cold conditions, but it does seem to be worse when it's even easier to fall off. I think, to be fair to Nozani, I feel like he was quite close to Vietti. Yeah. So I don't even know if the yellow flag would have actually been out when he crashed. I mean, of course, we've seen that there's not been any penalties given out, and probably rightfully so, because in a race situation, it's not the same, like you say, as crashing in like FP3 or whatever, because it's just a lot easier to crash in the race, and you're focusing on your race, so perhaps you don't see the flags. And obviously, in free practice, you just sit up. It's your lap over. In a race, you're not just going to sit up when you see a yellow flag. So, yeah, it's one of those things. And obviously, a lot of the crashes coming at turn 9. So we may as well keep talking about turn 9 with Tony Arbolino. Obviously, going for a bit of a move. up the inside of Canet and just misjudges it a little bit, hits Agora, then somehow stays on from that, hits into the back of Canet, again stays on, then goes up into the grass, almost high-sided himself, and rejoins. And that was effectively the end of his championship campaign. I mean, of course, it had been over for months at this point, but in terms of mathematically keeping it alive, he needed to be on the podium today. And of course, that put him outside the points, so pretty much gave Pedro the championship, but a bit uncharacteristic from Arbolino, I think. I mean, it's an easy mistake to make, and Agora does enter the corners in a strange manner, so I think it's probably more likely to catch out another rider. But do we maybe feel... I say I feel a bit of pressure, but I guess he probably would have sort of considered himself to finish in second at this point, but did seem like a guy that was under pressure, potentially, that kind of mistake.
I feel like because Agora was where he was, it becomes worse, because usually when you go for an overtake into that corner, you do run wide on exit, and then you kind of block it into the next two rights, and that's kind of it's a move that you do at turn 9, you don't really finish till the kind of apex of 11. And when Agora is there, and he literally is like a flat track, he's sideways ever, so he drifts in, stops it, and gets out much different to the way that Arbolino is going to take it. So I feel like Arbolino goes for the overtaking Canet, nothing doing wrong there, and I think he gets that move done relatively cleanly and doesn't have an incident if Agora's there. I think it's just the fact that he's kind of gone down a dark alleyway and run into the wall, and kind of just not enough room for him to kind of get it out of the way of Agora. So I think it was a bit unfortunate. I think on a normal day, if Agora isn't there, that move is a typical down the inside block, square it off, and then get the move and hold it through turn 10 and 11. So I think that kind of is what we would have seen, but just the fact that Agora is first gear sideways, back wheel spinning, and he's just drifting it in. The fact that he obviously is taking a much different style to the way you would take it if you're trying to make a block pass into turn 9. So I think that was I don't look at it and go, gee, that was terrible. What was he thinking? Like, he's never going to pull that down. I still believe he gets that move done if it's not for the other bike, but it was probably, maybe you could say the fact that he went for it into a corner where you could see that there was two riders close together, maybe he's under a bit of pressure. But I think, to be honest, since definitely the late European part of the season, he's kind of known the writings on the wall, so I don't think he's ever been kind of thinking, oh, I have to do it today, because all he's doing is kind of prolonging it, and that's all he's done really since kind of probably the season break, that it's just from the summer on, he's just kind of prolonging the inevitable, and today really the time kind of came for it, so not surprised really.
Yeah, I mean, it's just obviously something about Arbolino and Agora at that corner, just always some sort of incident.
I know.
It was interesting how it was those two again. I mean, of course I know he was trying to pass Canet, but it was of course initially Agora that he made the contact with, but further up the field, absolutely miles clear of everybody else, Fermin Aldeguer. Obviously been a lot of rumours about him over the last couple of last week or so. Obviously he was going to Repsol Honda at first, and then he was going to VR46 Ducati, so don't exactly know where he's going to end up next year. Could still be on the speed if at the end of the day. We have no idea where he's actually going to go, but been lots of rumours about him because of this form that he's been showing in the last few rounds. Obviously 3 pole positions in a row, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously he dominated in Thailand. He probably could have dominated in Phillip Island. We saw Alonso Lopez do it last year, but of course the race ended up being wet and that kind of messed him up. Did he win at Indonesia as well, if I'm not mistaken? I'm fairly sure he did, but
we'll check.
I could be wrong, unless he was second behind Acosta. But I have a feeling that, again, he was up towards the sharp end at Indonesia. And just yet again today, pole position, dominated the race. Like you say, was 3 seconds in front after like a few laps of Acosta, who is someone that smashed this Moto2 field. I mean, if it wasn't for Aldeguer, we'd be saying again today that Acosta dominated everybody and just pulled away by miles. But Aldeguer was another probably 5 seconds up the road, and in the end 3 because of the celebration. But yeah, it was just another masterclass by him. And to be honest, you can see why these MotoGP teams are interested. This kind of thing happened with Fabio Quartararo a few years ago, winning a few races on a speed up in a dominant manner. Yamaha took a punt on him. Well, Razlan Razali took a punt on him. It turned out to be a really good decision. And to be honest, Aldeguer, he was on people's shopping list at the beginning of last year. Remember how much praise we were sort of giving him back then, when he qualified pretty well, had some good weekends. Obviously, he was running really well at Argentina in particular, but it's kind of been a bit lost since then, been a bit better this season. And to be honest, the last few races have been so good. I mean, his second half of the season in general has been really good. Obviously, he won at Silverstone, but the last few races are so good. He's actually now got a good shot at third place in the championship, which is absolutely unbelievable. He's only like 20 points behind Jake Dixon now.
So Aldeguer was third in Indonesia. He was behind Canet and Costa.
Okay. But again, still up there. So
exactly, still in the ballpark. Yeah, correct. The one thing I want to point out is if we go back to last year with his teammate, he did exactly the same thing. He won a lot of these races, showed immense speed. So it's clear that the bike and that package seem to work here. So for me, I kind of hope that wherever he goes next, which to say?
Well, I suppose where was Alonso today? Like, kind of
exactly.
It's not a given that it's going to happen.
100%, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just hope that he gets off that bike for next year. Whether if he is still in Moto 2, get him on a Calyx, because I just think I mentioned it could have been last podcast to be honest, but just the fact I think he needs a Calyx if he wants a consistent year, because in a class where it's a spec series and you're the odd one out, you're always going to be up against it. So just lack of data. Obviously there is weekends like this, Silverstone and the like, where he shows immense speed and the bike clearly does work well. But I think if he does stay in the class, I'd like to get out. I'd like to see him on a Calyx, just to see what he could do against in the regular kind of format of the class. But the fact he's linked with VR46, I always find that weird, because at one point wasn't Maverick Vinales linked to go to VR46 when he was leaving Yamaha. I always look at VR46 as bringing through young Italian riders. So when they're going after Aldeguer, I find that quite weird. I thought it was like it'd be like Honda Team Asia going and signing a Costa when he was in Moto 3. I think it's weird that they're bringing up first of all, a Spanish, so it's a big rivalry there in terms of nationality, and not part of the VR46 Academy. So maybe they're still treating that team as it's VR46 sponsored, and it's not the team to bring through young Italians. But I just think it'd be weird if seeing a non-Italian riding in that team just because of the old outfit. But maybe I'm the odd one out. But he was linked with Repsol for the bones of last week. That has kind of gone and died down. To be honest, if you've ever ridden a motorbike in your whole life, I think at this point you have been linked with Repsol Honda. It's just one of those things where Kevin Swans was getting phone calls asking, did you want to ride a Repsol Honda in 24? So it's one of those things where if there's a rider out there who's technically available or not even available, they've been mentioned. At the moment, it looks like Luca Marini, so that would free up a spot in VR46, and that's where Aldeguer looks to be going. We kind of got news of Marini, we'll cover him later, but we got news of him kind of yesterday being Saturday. That kind of started snowball, and as of Sunday afternoon, Valentino's posting pictures of himself back in his Repsol days, so there must be some traction there. Now maybe it's a big kind of a big joke from Valentino, thinking that like he'd let his brother go back to Honda after everything they've done for him. So again, we won't know. Apparently there's an announcement coming in Doha for that, but that's basically how VR46 would get Aldeguer, and I think it's perfect time for Aldeguer to show brilliant form. The fact that there's out of nowhere another MotoGP seat looks to be opening up, so I absolutely rate him so much. I'd love to see him again. Like I said, if he stays in that class, I'd love to see him on a Calyx just to see what he could do over a full season. But it looks like he's probably going to be on a Ducati next year, which again, I'd love to see what he can do in that as well. So I'm a big fan of Firmino, so I look forward to seeing him regardless of where he goes, even if he does happen to stay in Speed Up or Bosco-Scuro.
Yeah, it'd be pretty cool to see the two of them moving up. Obviously, Acosta and Aldeguer, two very young riders. If they both move up next year, it would be really interesting to see how they get on. And I think it'd be good to see Aldeguer on a competitive bike on the Ducati rather than on the Honda. I think it's definitely a good decision. I think it's always better to let young riders go into the satellite teams rather than the factory teams as well. Just less pressure, allows them to find their feet a little bit, and then, they can move up after a couple of years. Again, worked out pretty well for Fabio, didn't it? So, yeah, it's probably the model you should follow. I mean, yeah, maybe it's not working so well for him now, but it did for a while whilst the bike was still somewhat competitive. But of course, we have to talk about the world champion, Pedro Acosta now, absolutely dominated this season. The last few races, he's not been pulling away and winning loads, but he's still been finishing in second place. He's been doing all he's needed to do to bring home that championship, and today he's finally done it. Not the most enthralling race to do it in, not like a last lap decider or anything like that, but he's done the work throughout the season. Pretty much just destroyed Arbolino. I mean, to be fair, Arbolino's not had a bad season at all, but Acosta, I'd love to see his actual results, how many times he's been off the podium. It can't be many. Can't be many at all. I could think like Catalunya and Termas and like maybe like 5 races off the podium across like a 20 race season. So that's pretty incredible. And it's not like he was absolutely last in those races or anything. Obviously, he fell off in Le Mans as well, but yeah, he's had a fantastic season, and no one was ever really laying a glove on him. And a bit of a interesting, well, not interesting, but a little bit strange with the celebration. He seemed to feel a bit ill. I don't know whether it was to do with the conditions, like the heat or the emotion or whatever, but he seemed to throw up a few times, which is a bit of a shame. I'm sure I put a bit of a damper on it for him, but after what's been a fantastic season, a thoroughly deserved championship, and good to see a nice wheelie up towards the line as well, just to cap it off.
Yeah, it's rare you see a rider in his condition when he came across the lane, because when he got to the, I think it was a exit of turn 2 where he took off the helmet and got on the new helmet and the whole shark thing. There's a couple times where he was on his knees and he was kind of coughing up some stuff, and a bit of it just shows that he was obviously throughout the race pushing to the limit, to the point where he was being cooked from the inside out. And I think when he got to the point, and I think Crayfar made a brilliant point where when you're going under racing speed, you're still getting enough air on you that it's, I'm not going to say okay, because you're still roasting, but the issue is, I have a perfect analogy in my room here of a fan, and when the fan's on, you feel okay. As soon as you turn it off, you just feel like you've turned the temperature up the other way. So when your air stops, everything just starts to come in and kind of close in you. So the heat really rises quickly, and you just feel as if you've made the thing worse by having that air on you for that length of time. Then you go into a complete stop, probably the heat sinks in even more, and then your actual body temperature will rise. So I'd say just a bit of illness. It's not the first person we've seen throughout the flyaways. I remember Jorge Martin had the IV drip in India, so there's plenty of issues. And again, even in his interview in Parc Ferme, he stopped 3 or 4 times to kind of cough up a bit of something. So it definitely wasn't in great condition. But once, I suppose, get a bit of food into him, probably a cold shower and some rest, I think he'll really be able to reflect on a great day from today. And to be honest, we've known, like, he came into the class last year, he was absolutely out of this world quick in pre-season. Everyone was like, it's a Costas championship. It didn't go his way. Just proved that, again, Moto2, even for Acosta, it was a bit too far in his opening season. Learned a lot, broke his leg, won a couple of races, showed good speed, and then we came to this year and it was like, oh well, watch out, like he's going to blitz some wins in the opening race. Of course, has the fall in Le Mans that kind of put the whole championship at a bit of a disadvantage, but he still managed to wrap it up with in 2 full races to go. So he's been immense this year, and I cannot wait to Valencia till we see him on a KTM or RC16, really we'll call it. But he's probably the most excitement probably since maybe Fabio going up, I suppose. Yeah, that's probably the most excitement. I'm thinking Marquez, obviously, when he moved up was big, but I think since then we've had probably Fabio, I think, was probably the next biggest hype done, because up through the whole class scenarios of the junior or the Red Bull rookies for Fabio, then when you got to Moto3 and Moto2, there was always hype around him. Even when his results weren't amazing, there was always hypes. When he gets up to the big class, he'll do something special, and he was immensely quick in his opening test as well. So again, there'll be a lot of eyes on Acosta for the remaining part of the season, even though his championship is already wrapped up.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he gets on in that Valencia test. I'm sure he'll be flying. Obviously, like you say, he was flying in his first Moto2 tests, and to be honest, last year Moto2, he did have obviously a bit of a hit and miss season, but if he hadn't broke his leg and missed those rounds and lost some momentum, he probably could have been an outside contender, because no one was particularly consistent in Moto2 last year. So he perhaps could have launched a bit of a late season charge, especially with, you know, some of the riding that those guys did. But yeah, he's managed to win it in his second season. Again, that's pretty much the standard, it seems. Rossi won 250s in his second season. Marc Marquez won Moto2 in his second season. So for these great riders that we're sort of already comparing him to, seems to usually be your second attempt. Moto3, sorry, was with a bit of a difference, but you're riding Moto3 bikes for like years before you get into Moto3 at this point, so it's not quite as big a step as it perhaps once was back in the day. But I'm sure Acosta is going to go on to do great things in Motogp, and we're both looking forward to seeing him next year, I'm sure. But speaking of Motogp, we may as well move on to it now. And to be honest, not the most interesting 2 races, to be quite honest.
Put it bluntly.
I think it was pretty much because of the tyre temperatures. I think that's probably the tyre temperature, tyre pressure kind of made the riders have to leave a gap, and they just couldn't do the passes on each other. The sprint race wasn't too bad, to be fair, but the main race, aside from a little bit of dicing, which I'm sure we'll get onto, was pretty dull, just like Moto2 really. I mean, we didn't even make mention really that Moto2 was dull, but it was pretty dull race. They're actually very similar the way they played out actually in terms of the races. But probably the biggest talking point of the weekend on track is probably Bastianini making his return to the sharp end, and I'm just so happy to see him up there because he's had a torrid season, struggled in pre-season testing, was on the back foot. Wasn't looking too bad by the time he got into Portimao, gets knocked off on the first lap of the first sprint by Marini, breaks his shoulder, is out for a good long while, tries to come back a couple of times, doesn't really work, has to take more time off, comes back, has kind of just been sort of average, maybe just about keeping in the top 10, maybe just outside the top 10, which is not great on the factory Ducati. Then he has the crash at Catalunya, skittles out a few riders and injures himself again, misses some more rounds, comes back again, isn't too competitive. I mean, let's not forget, last round he qualified last. He was literally last on the grid at Thailand. And this week, front row, fourth place in the sprint, probably could have got a higher position in the sprint if he wasn't defended by Bagnaia, and then just dominates the race. Just fantastic to see Bastianini. And this is what we expected from the start of the season, but it's good to see that he's still got it. It's not like the shoulder injury is going to stop him for his whole career, because I was a little bit worried that maybe it was one of those lingering things that you never really recover from.
Yeah, and it was good to mention as well that he switched this week, so he's kind of looked at Pecco's style, his data and everything, to kind of the telemetry behind the scenes and stuff like that, so he's kind of trying to take a leaf out of that book and trying to understand what the bike needs to ride. And what Pecco has said, he's actually said, Pecco said a lot about him this weekend, and to be honest, I've never felt like they were amazing friends when they were battling, but to be fair, Pecco has a lot of kind of good things to say about him this weekend. So the first thing was that he crashed, and the injury at the start of the season was the worst possible time, because when you're bringing on the new bike to the first 6 rounds, you're still kind of developing and understanding, you're still trying to make a direction. So Pecco said he missed all that, so basically he came back in Silverstone, was kind of the full, was it Silverstone or the race before that? He's back in Sachsenring, I believe. So Sachsenring was his kind of
it was back in Sachsenring,
full comeback. And he said he came back.
He tried in Jerez, but
I remember him trying. I remember Sachsenring being like the actual coming back for him. So he tried there, and just said the bike was so different. He had to get his head around it, because even from the bike he had rode in for the whole of Friday, I suppose, in Portimao, and probably for all of pre-season, it still gets refined even into the first few rounds. So Pecco said that he missed so much there that he was never going to have an easy time getting back to it. Of course, then we went to Catalunya, not a crash, was it a broken wrist from there in Catalunya, and then only coming back recently, and then he's switched to a thumb brake for the rear brake, which is something that Neil Hodgson kind of pointed out would be something you do kind of for the whole winter. So by the time you come around to your winter tests in February in Sepang, you're kind of it's kind of just muscle memory. But he's managed to seemingly get it down into a bit of a T already, and get it down to a nice level straight away. So it's obviously helped him in some aspect. I did notice that he was very, very good through the long corners and just kind of getting the bike to turn. Pecco kind of complimented, said that the one thing that he's kind of very good at is stopping the bike and entering the corner at high speed, kind of a bit like Quartararo. But he said the current GP bike is all about getting good exit and just driving out of the corner. So he said he's kind of riding it in the wrong way, and that's kind of where his struggles came from throughout the season. So it's probably shown that we're going back to a track he's been for the first time on this bike again. So we had the pre-season test there, and now he's come back with the same bike, slightly different but same overall bike, and we've seen a massive step. And again, he really surprised me in Saturday with his qualifying, just his outright speed, because Jorge Martins had an absolute blistering time, and then Bastianini came along and was looking like he was riding smooth and kind of consistent, but I didn't think anything about like how fast he's going until he was at one point half a tenth off of Jorge Martins' record-breaking lap time. In the end, Pecco went quicker on both of them, but it was great to see him back there, because like Bastianini has been historically not a qualifier. He's always been a man on Sunday that will get you the job done, a Rossi or a Binder kind of style rider that will come through to the front. So the fact he was qualifying pre-3, it was pretty obvious that come sprint on Saturday and Sunday he was going to have the potential to do what he did. I reckon, take it out of the championship, I reckon he gets at least second on the sprint, because I think he probably beats Pecco comfortably, as well as I think he catches Martin. He nearly rode pillion with Pecco for 4 or 5 laps, and you could see like it was it was actually so weird because he made Pecco look like Pecco was like all out of control and slow, because every braking zone he'd kind of go for a look and it was just trying to get out of the dirty air and the heat and stuff like that. And it was like he has so much extra speed in him. It was ridiculous to see. And all the long corners you could kind of see, you could kind of even feel from on board, you were just waiting for the onboard of Bastianini. He was kind of waiting for Pecco to kind of go so then he could go. He had just so much extra than him, which is something we've never seen. And I think I haven't seen this confirmed, but judging off of what Pecco said after the race, he said he struggled more with braking today. And historically, with setting up a bike, if a bike brakes really well, it doesn't tend to turn very well. It's kind of a balance. The bike turns or kind of brakes. You kind of have to pick a bit of a both. So the fact he said he struggled more on Sunday getting the bike stopped, I'd imagine he slightly went maybe setup wise same as his teammate, and that probably helped him beat Martin in the full race. But to finish up on Bastianini, brilliant to see him back, and I really hope he finishes the last 2 races strong and has a good finish this season, because it is up in the air at the moment where he'll be riding next year. So it's definitely a good time to find a bit of form.
Yeah, there's been a lot of rumours, isn't there, sort of this weekend about whether he's going to keep his ride, because of course Ducati have pretty much said, well, if Martin wins the championship, then we kind of want the number one on our bike. They want the factory. They wanted to put him on the factory bike. So yeah, there's been a lot of rumours about Bastianini and Martin, whether there might be a seat swap or something going on. But you know, this is kind of the way to refute that. Be like, look, I've been injured. I'm finally back. You know, I've got the thumb brake, and I'm now sort of back on the pace. It's kind of a good way to shut that down. And if Martin doesn't end up winning the championship, then I'd say probably a weekend like this and perhaps 2 more strong ones is probably enough to at least save his seat for another season. Because I think, to be fair, if he shows this form at the end of the season, you know, it's fairly like reasonable to assume that he'll probably be better next season and a bit more like how he was in 21 and 22. Because of course he's been very weak, struggling quite a bit this season, lost so much time and just trying to catch up. It's very tricky these days. You could do it probably back in the day, probably wasn't that much of a problem, especially, you know, factory Ducati. You know, if the factory bike, whichever one was good, you know, you guaranteed a podium. But that's just not the case anymore. Motogp is so competitive. If you're not quite feeling it, if you're a bit off, you're soon right at the back. Because again, like I said, he qualified last in the last race, puts up front row and wins this race. So that's the same guy. He's not fat. He's not just suddenly become a good rider. He was always good. It's just missing that last little percent, and that puts you right at the back. And kind of a weekend of good feel stories in a way, with the riders returning to form. Alex Marquez looking really, really fast again this weekend. Another rider who was right up there in qualifying, tops of the free practices. He's been looking really, really fast all weekend, winning the sprints in what was just a fashion where he looked visibly so much quicker. He was trying to pass in strange places, messing up the passes, running wide, because he was just so much faster, and he just wanted to get out of that dirty sort of hot air and actually get to the front, because he had so much more pace than Bagnaia and Martin, because he tried to pass Bagnaia, ran wide, got re-overtaken by Martin, and then was doing some proper dive bombing in every corner, so desperate to get back past Martin. Finally did it, got his composure back, passed Bagnaia, sort of like he's standing still, and that was sort of the start of Bagnaia's downfall in the sprint, and then checked out. And of course, in the main race, similar kind of story, just he had Bastianini in front of him, but 2 solid finishes. And of course, I know he's already won a sprint race this season, obviously in Silverstone, but that was in tricky conditions. This is the first sort of dry weather performance we've really seen from Alex Marquez, where he has been really phenomenal. Because again, another rider that looked really good in pre-season. And maybe that's part of it. He looked good at this circuit in pre-season. Perhaps putting some of that setup on has helped him unlock a bit of feeling. I did actually hear them saying on the commentary that, of course, he's had broken ribs, obviously Alex Marquez, so he's obviously been injured, so that's probably one of the reasons why it's been hamstrung a little bit. But he noticed that his tyre wear was much better, riding a bit more smoothly, because obviously he was riding smooth because he didn't want to be as aggressive with his ribs. And I think he's tried to take that on as part of his normal riding style. And to be fair, it seems to be working now that he's sort of more fit again. So I have to keep an eye on him for next race at Qatar. And of course, Valencia, the finale is going to be pretty good there. So yeah, it'd be good to see if Bastianini and Alex Marquez can be up there a little bit more, because that's pretty much all the Ducati's capable of winning at that point, which would be really, really good to see.
Yeah, and again, I think Alex Marquez has dropped a bit of a nugget there that's maybe giving us a small insight into what we could see next year, because I'm going to start off, as a lot of people don't like, by talking about Alex Marquez by instantly going to his brother. historically his brother has always come out and said he cannot ride a bike smooth, whether it be Honda or anything previously. His style is a style, but riding smooth doesn't work for him. And if you look at everyone on the Ducati, would you say any of them are aggressive, ragged riders? No, you wouldn't really. Bastianini gets immense lean angle. Pecco is as smooth as you like.
Quite aggressive with it,
to be honest, Martin is like, who could I compare it to now? His body movement is aggressive, but he's still silky smooth in a way. His inputs are smooth, but his body, he gets about the bike because he's a bit smaller. So I feel like I still look at Martin and think he's absolutely very Lorenzo-like, but just that he probably has the Marquez-esque body where he moves his body a bit more, and probably, again, because he's a bit smaller, probably has to use his weight a bit more in certain ways. So I think that's, again, maybe he's more aggressive than your average rider. Again, Zarco, not aggressive. Both the VR46 are very smooth riders. So maybe it'll be something that Marquez might struggle with straight away. Now, again, Marquez being so quick. Marquez being so quick. I should clarify which Marquez I'm about. Mark being so quick, he mightn't even need to make it. He might have just enough in his current riding. But maybe it'll be something that he'll have to try and adapt himself to be a bit more smooth, because historically he's always been out of control. It's always been sliding, locking and tucking, and that's just the way he's ridden it, and he's just been that good. So
he's never struggled with tyre wear though, particularly. He's not
true, exactly. I wouldn't say
he's been aggressive, but can look after his tyres.
True, that is a good point too. But if the Ducati doesn't react well to, I suppose, Alex Marquez. But then again, though, since his crash, has the sport been the same? It's not really. Everything is tyre wear issues. He hasn't, in any of the results where he's had tyre wear over the last 3 years, it's never been kind of a race winning results. It's always like towards the midfield. So
he's like tried a soft tyre just to desperately try and get into the lead group.
Exactly, just to give him some bloody TV time. So if you go back to kind of 13 to 19, we'll say, just to be kind of tidy, the bikes worn is what they are now. So it was definitely back then, it was more that he could ride it more in his way and it didn't affect him tyre wear wise. It might be the same when he jumps on the Ducati, that he does struggle straight out of the tyre if he does continue to ride away. It's just one of those things that in my head it kind of sparked up when Alex said that because of his ribs he couldn't ride his normal way, he had to ride smoother, and that gave him speed as well as brought the tyres back for longevity. So it'll be something to look out for him, but Mark. But back to Alex again, smooth is always fast. It's just historically the way to go is if you're smooth, you're 9 times out of 10 quick. If you go back and watch any of Pecco's qualifying laps throughout the year, when he's demoralised everyone and set the fastest lap by 3-4 tenths, he doesn't look like he's going very quick. He kind of drifts it in nice and controlled, very casual through the corner, and just looked really, really kind of consistent and smooth. And that's kind of the key to his lap time. And maybe Marquez is probably the outlier. He's about the only that looks out of control, but also fast. But then again, he's kind of Mark Marquez is the outlier in many situations. So again, the fact that a rider is kind of taking a step back to try and ride smooth because of an injury and found time, it's not very surprising really in a way, because again, like I mentioned, all the Ducati riders to some extent ride in a same smooth manner of a way. So obviously it's a way to get the package out of it. But I feel Alex just gets so much undeserved disrespect. 2-time world champion in his own right, Motogp podium finisher on a Honda, multiple sprint winner now, podium in main races. He is a top level Motogp rider. Is he his brother's level? No. Is he world champion level? Not yet. Is he going to get there? Maybe. If he develops later into his career. Again, we've always known him being a bit of a late bloomer in Moto3, Moto2, so maybe when he hits 31, 32, what's he now, about 28? I'd imagine he's about 3-4 years younger than Mark, so give him another 2 or 3 years, maybe then he blooms into a kind of a Davi style where he wins 4 races a year, comes second and third every year and tries to get a championship that way. I don't think he'll ever do what Mark has done and win 80% of a race in a championship, but I still think he's developing into a very, very consistent rider. And I think if he can just improve his consistency another step and just cut out some of these crashes where, like Thailand, where he was thinking ahead in Thailand when he crashed out, it was like, I have to catch Binder, and it was kind of a mistake from kind of getting ahead of himself. So his consistency is improved tenfold on that Ducati, but I still think that's probably still a bit of a weakness because his speed has never been doubted. Like Mark has always said, he's the quicker of the two. Obviously, one of them has 2 championships, the other has 8, so it's kind of hard to argue the point. But I think Alex is definitely definitely deserves to be in the class, definitely deserves that bike. And I think an actual race winning a feature length race is definitely on the cards. Maybe not this year, but definitely could see it next year.
Yeah, it's going to be a matter of time, I think, because, I mean, he could have won today if things gone slightly differently. If he gets the whole shot, potentially he does, because he stuck with Bastianini all race, so clearly had the pace, and he did it for the sprint. He, if that was the main race and there was 10 more laps, I'm sure he would have been able to manage that lead till the end. So I imagine it is coming, and something worth noting, lots to talk about Alex Marquez, is that stat that's been banding around how he was 2 seconds quicker this year than he was last year in terms of lap time, which is unbelievable. And of course, how you talk about Mark, I imagine if Mark is 2 seconds a lot quicker, I think the rest of the field would be a bit in trouble, I think, if he could find 2 seconds from stepping from the Honda to the Ducati. But speaking of a Ducati rider, Alvaro Bautista was the 2-time World Superbike champion, of course, former MotoGP rider, had his wild card this weekend. Obviously, we've known about this being a thing for quite a while. He's been testing the Ducati a few times at a few test sessions, and there was some pretty high expectations, a bit of a buzz around Bautista going into this weekend, because in his tests in Misano, he was within a couple of tenths of the actual MotoGP pace. It looked like he was running top 10, potentially even top 5 pace in those tests, but as it's come to the weekend, it's been a major disappointment if you're expecting one of those, because he's pretty much been propping up the timesheets every single session. Even in terms of the speed traps, he's been right at the bottom, which is, if you've watched World Superbikes, you'll know is usually not the case at all. He usually is absolutely blasting past everybody. He's about 10 stone wet through kind of thing. Like, he's a very, very small, very light rider, which of course does help. Probably helps more in Superbikes with the Pirellis than with the Michelins. But in terms of top speed, it's always going to help whatever category. But it seemed like he was just struggling all weekend. It comes out after the sprint race that he's got a neck injury from a postseason test crash from World Superbikes. But I don't know about you, Dill, but I certainly wasn't expecting him to be last in pretty much every session, and even behind current World Superbike rider as well, Ike Lecuona on the Honda. Like, I wouldn't expect him to be behind him and finishing behind Marquez after crashing in the sprint as well.
I definitely didn't think he'd be that low down now. I was a bit more level-headed. A lot of people kind of think that it was going to be 2006 Valencia, Troy Bayliss rock up and battle for the win and end up winning it. In my honest opinion, I saw all the speed he had in Misano, but in Misano he had a whole day to get up. Was he there for 2 days in Misano? I
think he had like 2 days. I think he went like multiple times. I think they had like two-day tests.
So if not, again, no, don't want to kind of disregard Alvaro as a rider, but he was never going to rock up in Sepang attractive. Already been to this year on a bike that he's only ridden 3 or 4 separate occasions. Maybe we'll say 3 just to make it easy. I think he went 3 times, a couple of different events in Misano. He was never going to rock up and battle Pecco, Jorge, Martin and stuff. It was always going to be a tough weekend because, number one, look at what he rides. I know Ducati and the V4 is amazing and it's closer to the GP bike than any other bike in Superbikes, but first off, they'll have different electronics. You have no right height devices. Your aero's a lot more limited. You're on Pirellis. They're worlds apart in bikes. So straight away, we already saw it when Petrucci came over in Le Mans. He was towards the back and he's, let's say, a top runner, you could say, in Superbikes on a satellite equipment. So he's clearly has the pedigree. He's won more races in GP than Alvaro did. So he's already proven that he's a race winner in GP. And he still was like around just taking a couple of points. I think he finished 13th in Le Mans, I want to say. So he
definitely better than Bautista.
Definitely better, exactly. So like straight away, that was kind of the ballpark that you'd imagine he'd be slightly better than that. So I was thinking, if Alvaro rocked up this weekend, finished 12th in the sprint and 10th in the main race, that's a fabulous weekend for me. That's a great showing for World Superbikes and for Alvaro as a rider. People thinking that, oh, he'll get straight through to Q1 or Q2, there'll be no question. He'll do what Pedrosa's done. See, but the issue with Pedrosa, though, is Pedrosa's been riding that bike morning, noon and night in Austria. He knows that bike down to T. He's been to Jerez a million times throughout his career, whether it be 125s, 250s, and of course when he's GP. So there's a lot more going for Danny when he rocks up to Misano or when he went to Jerez and stuff like that.
Also a better rider.
Also better. That too, 100%. Yeah, you can't.
There's no disrespect to Bautista. Pedrosa's like one of the aliens. So.
Exactly, yeah. He's exactly, he is one of the 4 aliens from the day. So you need to remember as well, when the aliens round, Alvaro was finishing 40 seconds behind them. So now again, equipment back then was probably not as consistent, so it's probably not a showing of his speed, but it still shows that how good Danny was in his day. But the kind of point they're making is that everyone seemed to get a bit over enthusiastic and a bit kind of losing track of themselves, that they thought that Alvaro was going to do something special. P10 for me against that grid on that bike, that would have been brilliant. That would have been hands down one of his best rides all year, and that's including everything he did in Superbikes. But everyone else was just thinking that, like, oh, he could get the podium here. But like, they've already been there earlier in the year. Different tyres, all the ride height devices, all the aero and stuff like that. That's so different. In a battle, the aero is massively different. Before that, from Crutchlow and Pedrosa over the last 18 months. So it was never going to be as easy as everyone thought, because the murmurs came out from Misano that he has top 5 pace. But like, again, that's him going multiple times. They went there for, you get about 3 hours practice before your race over a GP race weekend. That's kind of roughly your practice. If he's there for 6 sessions, he's definitely done nearly 10 times that amount of riding. So it was, you had to take out a grain of salt of where he was going to actually do. Turns out he was injured, and in the end struggled more than we expected. But if you think of it, top speed was down. He struggled turning left with his neck. The last corner as a left-hander, so obviously wasn't getting out of the corner correctly. Probably wasn't fully utilising the ride height devices perfectly. Wasn't perfectly in the groove of the bike. It was always going to be tough, but obviously his injury turned out to make it slightly tougher than it should have been.
Yeah, it was always going to be a bit of an uphill battle. I expected that. I thought he'd probably get a top 10. I thought he would be probably quick enough to do that based on the pace from Misano. And, you know, obviously, you make a good point about the whole, obviously the whole, you know, it's a different bike thing, but at least over Pedrosa in terms of the advantage, he's much more race sharp than Pedrosa's going to be, because he's been racing all season. That V4R, obviously, it does have aero. I mean, I know it's not to the same extent, but he is used to the aero effect and probably how it's different behind other bikes. So there is some experience with that. And, you know, a couple of times this season he's had to ride with like half the aero after having crashes and stuff, or having contact with riders. So he knows how to ride it when it's a bit unstable. But yeah, it was always been difficult for him. Obviously coming into a GP always is. We see it these days. You know, gone are the days where a wild card can turn up. Pedrosa's kind of the exception, and you make a good point. Obviously that he rides that bike all the time. He developed that bike. He knows it super well, but also he just is next level kind of talent. So there is that to it as well. Obviously that helps Pedrosa out when he comes in wild cards. But yeah, it was quite disappointing. Obviously it makes more sense now this whole injury thing's come out, and just a bit of a shame for him, because for sure this was a bit of a treat for him. Obviously it's actually for winning the championship last year, I think, because it was all set up before. Obviously he won it this year, but I'm sure it's probably took a bit of a shine off it for him if he's in a bit of pain and he's been riding around the back. I'm sure he's not been enjoying that too much, since he's pretty much been riding around the front for the last 2 seasons in World Superbikes, so it would be a bit of a culture shock. Now, we did make some reference to this earlier on in terms of the race, obviously with tyres and tyre pressures. That's the next topic that we're going to go on to now. Is I know everyone's favourite topic, tyres and tyre pressure. So it's so fun, but it was a massive thing obviously this weekend. Worth noting as well that Martin has already had a warning for sort of breaching the tyre pressure rules in one of the earlier events this season. And first time you get off with a warning, because it's just one of those things they decided to do. But then any other offence, you actually get a penalty. You get a 3-second penalty if you're not within. I don't know how much percent of the race do you have to be within the pressure limit. I'm not exactly sure, but it's about like 60% or something. It's actually not quite as. It's not as much.
Definitely over 50%, because it's kind of that's the way to do it. Because
it's more than half of it, but it's not like 90 or anything like that. I think it is a bit less than that. So obviously he's got to be extra careful with that. So I think that played a part in it. But both races, even Moto2 to an extent, although I suppose the tyre pressure is not so much of a thing in Moto2, just both races were kind of a bit spread. But there was probably about a second between a lot of the riders, and there were some aggressive passes early on just to try and get that clean air. That just seemed like as soon as you got behind someone, if you were behind them for 3 or 4 laps, that's pretty much it. You had to just drop back. And we saw that in the main race in particular, that just like Martin and Bagnaia, they battled a little bit, but then after that, pretty much the gap just immediately went to like about a second, and then obviously after that, Martin just dropped back because he didn't have the pace, but he immediately had to drop back about a second just to let the tyres sort of recover. And then there was like a second or so between a lot of the riders throughout the whole race, and you know, riders further down the order were making comments about the tyre pressures and things like that, and it was making it difficult to pass. It was a big talking point this weekend. Hopefully we'll be fine for the next 2 races, because it'll be a lot cooler with the night race, and obviously Valencia being obviously in Spain in the winter, so it's going to be a bit cold. But yeah, it's not the most interesting topic to talk about, but it definitely affected the racing quite massively because riders just couldn't run close for very long.
Yeah, and a lot of people's question is why can't they run them lower so that when they go higher, it gets in the window. Now, the issue with running them low is chances of sporadic delamination is a potential. So, for example, if you go down to an outside curb, have a bit of a moment, you could easily delaminate a tire, and that would result in a horrific crash. I remember twice in the Michelin era, we had Scott Redding in Argentina have a rear tire delaminate going around the long left turn 6. That came up, that like delaminated came up and actually wrapped it around his waist, and like I don't think it broke ribs, but it definitely like bruised his whole side. And then as well, actually at Sepang, Loris Baz had one down the main straight where just clicked fifth gear on the straight and the rear tire went pop. So it is a worry if we go too low. Michelin has said before and recently that they have taken tires off rims after races, cut them open, and there is signs of them being run under the limit and signs of stress fractures. So it is showing that they aren't making this up there. The whole point of this tire pressure thing is for safety, and that is the bottom line. Unfortunately, it's ruining the racing in some aspects, because today's race was like one of those Formula 1 hybrid areas where they couldn't get in within like 2 seconds of each other for more than like 3 laps before they just front tires went through the roof, and that was that was kind of a race. We ended up having top 4s literally as if they were trying to spread the whole race out. It was such a spread race. We had 4 laps of Pecco and Martin. Martin couldn't get it done. He almost got it done into turn 3, and then Pecco managed to ride around the outside of him, which was absolutely fabulous. And that was that. That was the race done. From there on, we instantly felt that if Martin couldn't get ahead of him straight away, he would have to distance himself, because not only would his tyre pressure go through the roof, you just risk a crash. So just there's no point riding that close. But as the race went on, it just showed that he, no matter if it was the tyre pressure or just everything that was going on, he couldn't ride close to Pecco, or just didn't seem to have the speed of Pecco, because as the race went on, he kind of got dropped. Towards the end, Pecco does kind of come back at Alex Marquez. So again, Pecco's usually amazingly good on his tyres. That's one of his strong points. So again, maybe he just managed it, but it does turn out today Pecco's actually over it, gets a warning. So he had mentioned at the start of the weekend that he's hoping to get away this weekend and to use his kind of, most people are referring to him as their joker card, kind of get them out of the way. So he wanted to use it in Qatar next time out, next weekend, just because the ambient temperatures there in the evening time, there's a bit of a dew comes up onto the track, which means tire pressures are kind of critical there. So it's kind of a small thing now he's going to have to worry about next weekend, whereas it was probably one thing he could take off his mind, an advantage he'd have over Jorge in Qatar. But now they're both equal, and there is a percentage possibility that we could go to Valencia. The championship is wrapped up on the final lap, final corner, and an hour later the championship standings are reversed because of a tire pressure warning. So there is a potential that the championship could be decided on these tire pressure monitoring systems, and that would be horrific for the sport, and it would be disgraceful really. But it's just the way the sport's at the moment, and we know Michelin said there's not a new front tire coming to 2025, so it's going to be like this all next year as well, which is it's a shame really, because it's showing now that they're policing it, and they didn't police it till halfway through the season. Silverstone was the first race, which was obviously being in Britain, colder temperatures wasn't an issue, but it shows any time we go to a hot country, most of Europe during the summer, we're going to have these issues where they can't get close to each other. So we're in a bit of a rock and hard place at the moment, because tyres can't manage the loads from the aero on the ride-out devices, and the whole kind of agreement between the teams is that they all have to unanimously agree to change the rules, and Ducati have the advantage with the aero and the ride-out devices and everything going on with their kind of aero fairing. So realistically, no matter what they try and change, Ducati's going to probably object to it and keep their advantage. So we're kind of stuck at the moment in a bit of a limbo, because we don't really know what's going to happen in the coming 18 months really.
Yeah, that's the thing with trying to ban things. Obviously, it has to be a unanimous decision, unless it's on safety grounds. And I think Neil Hodgson was saying on the TNT commentary that you could probably make a fair argument that this is a safety issue, so it could be banned. I think they could just get rid of the ride height devices, because it adds nothing to the racing really, makes the lap times a bit quicker. But it's the most common failing part, Like, the amount of retirements we see from ride-height devices being stuck on is ridiculous. We have riders sometimes don't brake hard enough into the first corner to get them off. I think Fabio Quartararo had that in the sprint this weekend. He had a terrible sprint start, but I think he tried to take a sweeping line through turn 1, so therefore wasn't braking as hard, and I don't think he actually fully disengaged his ride-height device. There's too many instances to count of the ride-height devices not coming off and people doing full races with the ride-height devices on, and it just adds nothing. It just adds more pressure onto the front tyre because they can brake later, because it stops obviously the rear coming off the ground and things like that. It makes them quicker on the straight, so of course they have to brake harder to slow down. It doesn't add anything. It's not really relevant to road bikes either or anything like that. I mean, I'm not one of those I'm not massively like, oh, it needs to be road relevant or like one of those people, but a lot of the technology is, and it does work its way down, but ride-out devices is one of those things that's just never going to be down. I think it's like originally like a motocross thing, right? Like it's kind of adapted
it's for the racing starts. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for the race starts. So it is just one of those things. It's kind of unnecessary to have. It does just add that extra. So they could potentially get rid of it with a safety thing, but they probably want to keep. To be honest, it probably isn't the worst idea. I might peg back Ducati, make it a bit more competitive as well. But you don't want to be changing the rules to hamper people just because they've done a good job. That's just they've made their bikes the rules. But I'd personally quite like to see that stuff being banned. I mean, I'd like to see it all gone really, but fair enough, keep the air or whatever for now until the next rules cycle or whatever. But ride-out devices, they already banned the front one this year, so ban the rear one as well. I mean, it's not.
Have we noticed the difference though with the front one gone? Realistically,
no, not really.
Yeah, the sprints after the first few sprints, and they kind of got the head around the farm, and it's kind of gone back to 3 or 4 laps of kind of couple moves, and then it's kind of standard racing. Really, the racing has not been by any means amazing this year.
No, it's probably been better than last year. In fairness, I think it has been a bit more, and that's probably because we actually have the contenders fighting and stuff. And I think we'll probably talk about that in a minute. Whereas last year it was kind of Quartararo just being beaten up by everybody on a Ducati. So, but I think we have had some better races. We had some good battles between Bastianini and Bagnaia last year, I guess, as well. But I feel like the races have probably generally been a little bit better. But in terms of actually noticing a difference in terms of speed without the front ride-out devices, we've not noticed that. So, like my point kind of was, if we can ban those, then why not ban the rear one as well? Just ban them all. It just seems a bit. It doesn't add anything. If nobody has them, no one has a disadvantage, and just nothing changes. Therefore. So that's my opinion on it anyway. But yeah, it is a tricky issue. But I did say we were probably going to talk about the championship battle, some of the battles that were going on, and overall this weekend it has been a 1-point swing. So all this racing for such a small difference in terms of the actual championship gap. It's actually gone back up 1 point in Bagnaia's favour, but pretty much the same as it was going in. I mean, 1 point is going to be important. It probably could make a difference at the end of the season, but ultimately I don't think either of them are really going to be really disappointed or really thrilled with the weekend. Maybe Bagnaia will be a bit happy that that's 2 more races down for Martin to make points upon him, but of course they went bar to bar in both races, just like they did in Thailand as well. So it's good to see that we actually get some proper battling between the two of them. Obviously in the sprint, Bagnaia was leading early on, but as soon as Alex Marquez passed him, Martin immediately attacked him at the penultimate corner, the famous 2015 corner. That's just to say which one it is, not to actually mention the situation at all. But obviously he immediately went past him there, and that's pretty much the battle over. To be fair, actually between them in the sprint, but in the main race, Martin tried it there, he ran wide. Bagnaia cut back and sort of picked the bike up on him a little bit, was proper aggressive, and then Martin went into turn 4, and obviously, like you mentioned earlier, the really good move from Bagnaia sort of to hang it around the outside of turn 5. Very brave. We don't particularly see the aggressiveness come so easy to Bagnaia. It's usually a bit forced and a bit maybe too much, like in terms of like he's not that confident with it. But on that occasion, it was very good, and against the championship rivals, of course, you've got to be aggressive, but I think when we've seen Bagnaia try and get his elbows out before, it looks like a guy that doesn't get his elbows out trying to get his elbows out. But on this occasion, it was really, really good. And it was a nice little battle, but pretty much the only thing that happened in the race, aside from Fabio Quartararo, was obviously a good little cameo throughout the race in terms of the fighting. But yeah, it was good to see the two actual championship contenders properly going at it once again this weekend, like we did last time out.
Yeah, I think Pecco's just doing enough at the moment to kind of capitalise in the main races again. He looked quite good today. He looked very racy. I think over the last maybe 3 weekends, he seems pretty decent on the Sunday in terms of getting his kind of elbows out. Of course, Thailand just is a very awkward track to make the moves, and he did try an over around the outside move there as well. So he definitely is trying. He's definitely trying these different things, and that move around the outside probably is the 2-point swing or the 1-point swing overall, but the 2-point in the weekend back in his favor. So it was really, really strong because he's so smooth. It just leans across him, and if you're the rider on the inside, if you've ever had this happen to you, whether it be bike, car racing, when you're on the inside, you're like, you have nothing you can do. You're being pinched between the inside of the track and the rider, so you're kind of like, well, I'm going to come off worse here if we touch somehow. So you kind of end up kind of like freezing in time and kind of like, oh well, I have to leave it happen. It's very awkward especially when it's a longer corner and he has that much, you can't kind of push him out because he already had the momentum out of the previous right-hander. It was a fabulous move, and in fairness, that really, in my eyes, deserved the 1-point swing in his favour for the whole weekend because that move was just special. His qualifying lap was immense. Pecco was very good this weekend. It looks like, again, still the sprint doesn't really suit him. He doesn't really have the perfect balance of speed, and he just doesn't switch it on usually in the sprint as quickly, especially of late. Obviously, at the start of the season, he was able to do it in some races, but
yeah, he was really good in the sprints at the start of the season. That's where all his points came from. He kept crashing on the Sundays, but he seems to have
really turned it around now. But in fairness to Martin, he tried this weekend and just is missing 1%, and this weekend he's lost another 1 point. Now again, not really a major thing losing that. It's not like he's lost 15 points or 10. It's still up in the air, but you got to think how many times over the last few weekends now has he lost points overall or gained back 1 point or something. Does not. Pecco's just doing enough to kind of frustrate him into probably making a few mistakes here and there because the championship swing is not enough. We're going to Qatar. Track that was recently used by Formula 1, so I think the track shouldn't be in too bad of a condition, to be honest, which is probably going to be something new. Usually, years gone by, we go there for the opening race of the season. We also go there in mid-March for a 2-day test, so usually we get there with a bit of rubber. Now, this time it's going to be Pirelli Formula 1 rubber, so maybe it'll be slightly different. Now, of course, it's been a few weeks, so it's not going to be a perfectly rubbered-in track. It'll still be a bit green, but the fact that it's not a 6-7 months without anything being on it, it's going to be interesting to see how early that is. And as well, it's always dirty off the race line, so maybe with the cars gone around there, maybe it won't be as bad. Again, maybe I'm kind of reading into too much, but in terms of a sprint, it's going to be very hard to go off the racing line. And even usually, if you kind of go back to any of the Rossi Dovi battles, Marquez Dovi, you see Marquez or Dovi going off the racing line, there's a lot of sand being kicked up. So even after all of Fridays running from 3 classes, all of Saturdays running from the 3 classes, and then 2 races in the junior categories, and then you get to GP and there's still sand being kicked up. So it's going to be an interesting and abrasive race in the sprint. So the sprint is going to be a completely different dynamic that we probably haven't seen this year because of the dirty sand. Again, if we go back to Argentina, but that was in the wet, so or was the sprint wet in Argentina?
The main race was wet.
Was it the main race? Dry. So yeah.
Maybe from like P16 to like first, not the first corner.
Oh, he did, yeah. Maybe we'll have a similar sprint to that, so where it'll be a bit more questionable because of the track temperatures and track conditions. But Valencia, we've already touched on it. It's just a lottery because it's going to be cold. There's certain corners that are historic for crashes. Turn 4, the final corner, Adrian Campos is never a good one. The turn 11, I think it is, the internal, like the infield section where it kind of doubles back on itself. That's always an easy one. Where the long lap is, that's an easy place to make a small mistake. Valencia is a bit of a Mickey Mouse track. Yeah, it's one of those. It's a go-kart track that GP go to. Now, in terms of viewer kind of going spectating, it's meant to be amazing because it's in a bit of a bowl. You can see all the track from every race. But in terms of a racetrack, it leaves a bit of a bit to be wanting because the riders don't say it's amazing to ride. There's never great racing here, so. And always we do get a bit of weather there, so it could be like a wet race on Sunday in 2 weeks, 3 weeks time where a championship could be decided, so it'll be exciting. But if you are going in with 6 points in favour or 6 points against or whatever it may be, it's going to be a tough weekend. It's going to be tense. We've seen it throughout the years with 13, 15, 06, 17. There's been many titles that have gone down to the last race in Valencia, and unfortunately there's always a winner and always a loser, and I think it's probably realistically going to go that way. I don't think it would be decided next week out.
Yeah, it is one of those things. I think it is going to go down to the last round. It could be very, very interesting with how it's going to play out. I think Qatar probably is going to be pretty sandy. I think obviously F1 went there, but it's probably like a month ago at least now.
Yeah, already. So, another week on top of that.
And it's in the desert, so it's always sand blowing onto the track. So yeah, I think. I mean, it's better because usually probably last time like MotoGP go there, the last time there was a track running was probably when MotoGP were there the year before. So yeah, it's one of those things, but. Yeah, they'll clean the track up, and Qatar is one of those long-standing circuits. I think it probably will be a good battle, and hopefully, it's always nice to see the night race as well. It's just something a bit different, isn't it, throughout the year?
Yeah,
and usually it's going to be a bit weird because usually feels like the start of the season when you're at Qatar.
Yeah,
you don't know like anything. Whereas
if you're like starting the season in Valencia, it would just feel wrong.
Yeah. It was like that year where they had Portimao at the last round, and then like Portimao's like round 3, like the next year as well. It just felt like you're already back here, and it was a bit strange. It's gonna be like that next year with the Qatar and then Valencia and then Qatar again. It's literally gonna be one round between the two Qatars. So yeah, it will be a little bit weird. Now, one more topic to discuss for this one is something we've kind of made a little bit of a mention to earlier, but that's when we talk about Aldeguerre, we'll talk about Aldeguerre more himself. But the most recent rumour of who's going to end up on the Repsol Honda is surprisingly turned out to be Luca Marini. Now, I think that's one we could certainly say nobody saw coming at all. Maybe if you were Luca Marini's manager, maybe you saw it coming, but
I would say maybe even not, though, because Luca Marini's manager is a certain Valentino Rossi. And
that's a good point.
Let's say HRC and Rossi have never been the best of friends since the year 2003 in that swing arm.
Yep, that is very true. Actually, that is a good point. I was sort of saying it as a off the cuff comment. Yeah. Yes, you are. No, you're right. If Rossi is his manager, then that makes the whole situation even weirder.
Yeah.
What is going on? But yeah, anyways, if you don't know, if you haven't heard, which I'm sure you have, if you've watched MotoGP and then listened to our podcast, I'm sure you'll have heard this news already. But it's strongly rumoured now that Luca Marini will be going to Repsol Honda to replace Marc Marquez, and of course, Aldeguerre is rumoured to go into his place. But it sounds like it's a done deal, even from what we've been told, and just seems like a very weird decision in a couple of reasons. Obviously, you make mention there, the Rossi family, not exactly HRC's best friends, although Marini, again, like you said with Alex Marquez earlier, talking about the brothers, people don't like that so much, but to be fair, Marini is his own person, his own rider in his own right, so fair enough. If he wants to go there, he wants to go there, I'm sure. I mean, how the negotiations will go if Rossi's his manager, I'm not too sure. that one might have been a bit awkward, but it's like, yes, you can have Marini if I can have the 500. Maybe that's
I have thought about that. I have thought
that's
about.
why I sent him there.
Yeah.
He's like, no, you've got to go there so I can have my 500. But yeah, it's a strange decision because obviously there's that element to it, but take that away because again, like I say, Marini's his own rider, his own person, so any things that his brother has against Repsol Honda is completely separate, and just seems like, why would you want to jump off what's the best bike currently? I know it's a year old Ducati's on, but why would you want to jump off the Ducati to jump to a Honda? I know Zarco has already done that, but Zarco is at a different point of his career. He's an older rider. He wants maybe the challenge of bringing up the bike and improving it, because he probably knows at this point he's not going to win a world championship unless he does jump ship and the Honda becomes amazing. I suppose he could, but he's low down on the Ducati pecking order. They were basically just like, oh, we're going to hang on to you until someone's better and we'll get rid of you. So he's sort of jumped before he's pushed, whereas Marini always going to have a spot in his brother's team unless, I suppose, there's some major circumstance, major change where they need to get rid of him because they need to put somebody else in there. But he's pretty much always going to be safe there. Always going to be a decent bike, at least for now, but you've got, the supports, all the people that he's came through, all the classes with, he's pretty much been the VR46 for years. I think, 2016 was the last time he was in a different team in, forward racing or something like that. So it's been a long time. He's been in that, sort of VR46 team. I know Avintia was technically still Avintia, but it was coloured up the same as the rest of the VR46 bikes, so I think that's close enough, isn't it? But yeah, I can't comprehend the decision. What's he doing it for? Surely it's just financial, is it? I mean, maybe he also wants the clout of being a factory rider, and maybe again with Zarco wants to build up a project. But I feel like he's quite young still to be sort of going to do that.
There's a lot of there's so many different parallel like kind of universes going on in all this, because straight away you think Monster to Red Bull. So there's immediately, I was thinking there, you're making a point.
I forgot about that.
Is there any of Valentino's proteges that are Red Bull affiliated? I don't believe they are, really, because you have obviously the two VR46s are what Monster, Pecco's Monster, Frankie's Monster. So like, and obviously like Valentino being Monster Energy is one of still probably biggest athletes. Like, it's huge, that kind of whole branding down through the.
He has his own monster can, like, you know.
Exactly. It's so it's a bit, even it might be weird to start off with a sponsorship straight away at this point, but it's definitely worth kind of talking about. You also have the fact of, we've mentioned the relationship between Valentino and Valentino's team and HRC and Repsol, and it was when he left in 2003, huge breakup, huge fallout. Words were said, it's never been patched up. They were nice enough to give him the bikes to make the little parade in Valencia in 21. They promised him his 500. We made the reference when he won the 2001 championship, end of the 500 era, he was promised that bike for win the title. To this day, he's never gotten it. He's still quite sour about it. He mentions it quite a bit. Quite frequently, he tries to get it. As recently as the end of his career, he's tried to get it off them as a retiring gift. He was hoping he could get it off them. Maybe he's thinking, I'll build some bridges with them. I'll send my brother over there and help them rebuild, and in 3 years' time, I'll get my Cinquecento, as he calls it, because it's 500. And I don't like. It's such a U-turn from Valentino and his people. If it's a decision for him to, if it's Luca's decision to kind of jump ship and look, I'm going to go there. I know the relationships between you, I know the history, but it's my chance to be a factory rider. You can understand that. But if it's Valentino and his team that have kind of brought this offer to Luca and think, what would you think about being a factory rider for Honda? We've come looking to you. What do you think of it? So it's just a whole weird scenario, because like we've seen Valentino at a couple of races this year, and you kind of see him in and around the boxes with his riders. Are we going to see Valentino back in a Repsol box? No, we're not, because that will just not happen. Simply won't. No matter if it's Pecco riding for Repsol, that will not happen. So even if his brother in there, it's just such a weird situation. But again, I think at the end of the day, Luca, as we say, and as we did with Alex Marquez, he's his own rider. If in terms Honda, if we go to the Honda side of the coin, fabulous signing for Honda, because he's very, very, what's the right word, kind of pragmatic. He thinks about his riding. He understands what he needs to go quick. He's not a rider that's just twists the throttle harder when he needs a bit more speed. Like he understands more than your average rider. So he's probably a good rider if you're building a team around it. Maybe Valentino looks at Honda, goes, right, they've lost Marquez. They've lost the guy that's been an amazing talent for the last 10 years, has kind of dragged Honda into a bit of a pit. If you remember when he signed for them in mid-2012, Honda were kind of top of the world at that point. Their GP project was absolutely on top of the world. 2 championships in a row, and then we got to 2015 where the bike went the wrong direction. It never really covered. Marquez managed to make the difference, and that's kind of what happened from 16 through to 19, them years, is that it was Marquez making the difference. It was never, the Honda was brilliant. If you ever go back to any of them years, look at Danny's results, look at Cal's inconsistency, look at when Danny left, when they would put another rider next to Mark, they can never replicate his form, they can never be as consistent. So maybe now Valentino and his team, or Luca, thinks they've lost Marquez, they're going to have to go back to the drawing board, they're going to have to think, right, we're going to try and build a bike that's more user-friendly, go down the Ducati route of, can rider A, B, C, D, E, F, can they ride it? And if they can, then they can get some results. So maybe Luca's thinking, I'll go in there alongside another very, very intelligent rider in Joan Mir, and think, I can build this project with Mir. We're both young, we can take this project for a couple of years, and maybe that's my best chance of becoming a Grand Prix winner, a Grand Prix frontrunner, because even in Ducati, I don't ever see him going up to Pramac. I definitely don't see him going to the factory team. So he probably, it kind of makes sense in some aspect of the fact that he probably thinks this is his only way of progressing in terms of GP. So there's many reasons to it, and I think Honda would probably want him because of the fact that he knows Ducati. There'll be a lot of like development he'll be able to do with the team, and the fact, I think as well, they need someone like a Luca that can understand how to develop a bike, understand the setting up of it, and they've lost Marquez. they need to go away from that. The Tiger Woods, the Muhammad Ali's, the kind of stars where they don't follow the same fundamentals as your average rider or whatever, and the kind of superstars, they kind of do it their own way. So I think they need to go down a more of a consistent. And I think if you look at Marini, how many crashes he had this year. He did crash this weekend, which is, of course, on point as always, but he's not a crasher, so he's going to be good for development. So I think, as in terms of a Honda signing, he's brilliant. Now I've rambled on for about 47 minutes, so I'll throw it back to you to kind of see what you think of them points.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I suppose you make good points saying why he'd be good for Honda, but he is also about the 4th or 5th rider on the list, so
True.
They clearly didn't specifically go for Luca Marini, as in like we really, really want Luca Marini. So they approached like Vinales, they approached like Aleix, they approached Oliveira. So they clearly wanted a Aprilia rider by the sounds of it. But
yeah,
they've approached quite a few different riders out of the gear by the sounds of it as well. Probably some others that we don't even know about. There's probably been some slight talks. So it's not like they're desperate to get Marini, but he's probably like the best like available rider, I guess. A bit like what they did when they signed Alex Marquez, like off the back of winning Moto2. Like he was the best rider available to replace like Lorenzo. They probably weren't desperate to have him, and I'm sure Mark being in the team helped. Probably like say, oh yeah, get Alex. But it seems like one of the situations where, yes, like I think Luca would be a good rider for them, but like it clearly isn't the first choice. So yeah, it just seems like a bit strange from all sides potentially. I mean, it could turn out to be a really good thing, but I feel like Marini especially, he's one of those riders. He is a slow burner. I feel like maybe he's a bit of a confidence rider as well. Like I don't think he's going to get on with the bike very well. I think he'll, if it is a bike that you crash quite easily, like you say, it's not a crasher. So if he starts having crashes all of a sudden, that's going to be pretty confidence sapping if you've never been a crasher throughout your career. So yeah, it's I think you make good points about like why he'd be a good rider to develop a bike, but I feel like he's not exactly their first choice, and I feel like maybe it's not the best thing for him. But I guess we'll find out. I mean, it could end up just not happening at all yet.
Yeah.
It changes every like we said. We've listed off so many riders that have been rumored to be in this seat, and they're clearly just trying to find somebody now. Because it's like Aprilia a few years ago, everyone's turning it down. I mean, they have a Honda protege in Moto2 who is for the second season in a row now staying in Moto2 rather than riding their free bike. So, yeah, I think the only person clambering for that seat is Iker Lecuona.
Yeah.
By the sounds of it. He's pretty much anyone desperate, and maybe Di Antonio. Yeah, I suppose it just I suppose we'll have to see how it turns out. But that pretty much brings us to the end of this edition of the MotoGP Extra podcast. Now, before we do go, did just want to say we are getting towards the end of the season, a couple of rounds to go. And of course, you can now leave comments on the podcast. We have been reading them as well, so we do appreciate it. Before the podcast, we would go through looking at some of the comments, weren't we, and just sort of looking at what people were saying. And we really, really do appreciate all the support. And just thought we'd say, if you have any suggestions or feedback or anything you want to give us as we go into season 3 of the podcast, it'd be really, really appreciated, because we do want to try and build and improve. I think I speak for both of us when I say that I think we've probably made a good step this year compared to the first season of the podcast. So hopefully we can try and make another one, maybe do some the little segments or something, depending on what you guys want to see. So yeah, do let us know in the comments, because we do actually read them, and I don't think there's a way for us to reply, unfortunately, to them, but we can see them, so that's always nice. But yeah, that pretty much we can see when people have left a comment, can't we? So yeah, so maybe just for season 3 that we'd maybe have a segment where we kind of go over last week's comments, is what I was kind of saying there. So maybe something along the lines of that. But again, like we said, let us know what you'd like to see, and if there's any sort of features you'd like us to cover, or any sort of direction you'd like to see a podcast go, just let us know, and we'll try our best for season 3. It's just the fact that we've 2 more podcasts after this one. It would be just nice to see some feedback and just understand what you like, don't like, and what you'd like to see going forward. So yeah. Yeah, that's it would be really, really appreciated. But hopefully you have enjoyed this one. If you are listening on Spotify, do rate the podcast 5 stars, or if you're watching it on Dale's YouTube channel, do give a like. And again, of course, leave comments there, because again, of course, Dale will definitely see them. I'll see them as well. They're able to actually reply on YouTube, but on Spotify as well, you can leave comments, and maybe we'll try and do some more polls as well, because it seems like you enjoyed the feedback from the last one, being able to sort of vote on who you think is going to win the championship. But There we go. Then we'll see you next week for the Qatar GP.